The room was silent,
I'll love you for
except for the
real.
faint hum of the neon lights outside. She stood there, trembling slightly, eyes darting between the faces around her. "Will you pretend to love me tonight?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, heavy with fear and desperation. He looked at her, calm, unshaken, and for a moment, the weight of the world seemed to rest in his steady gaze. "I'll love you for real," he said, his voice low but unwavering, echoing like a promise in the emptiness around them. But this wasn't just about love. The laughter that followed from the crowd, sharp, mocking, and cruel, cut deeper than any blade. Every snicker, every glance, every whispered comment reminded them both who they were to this world. Targets, outsiders, marked by the color of their skin. She had felt it all her life. The silent rejection, the doors slammed in her face, the eyes that measured her worth like it was something to pity. And tonight, in this room full of strangers, the humiliation was unbearable. Yet, deep down, she knew this moment was not the end. Something was about to change, something no one could ignore. Her name was Aaliyah Thompson. 24. Brilliant and unapologetically herself, she carried her grandmother's strength in her posture and her father's fire in her eyes. From the outside, she seemed fearless, but anyone who knew her well understood that courage often came wrapped in quiet battles. Every morning, she walked the same crowded streets to her office in downtown Chicago. This city promised opportunity, but often whispered prejudice in hushed tones. The moment she stepped into her building, she felt it. The subtle shift in air when colleagues saw her approach. Doors weren't slammed, but they didn't open either. Greetings were offered, but they were filtered and cautious. It was never overt, just a constant undercurrent, a reminder that she wasn't fully welcome in the spaces she worked so hard to belong. Aaliyah's closest friend, Marcus Davis, was intimately familiar with this struggle. Marcus, a year older, with a contagious laugh and a heart too big for the cynicism around him, often walked beside her as a shield. However, he sometimes admitted the weight of fighting invisible battles left him exhausted. He'd seen Aaliyah endure microaggressions, comments meant as jokes, promotions passed over without explanation, people glancing at her resume like it was an oddity. "I don't get it," he said one morning, leaning against the coffee shop counter, as they waited for their usual lattes. "You're the smartest person in that office. The projects you lead, they crush it every time. And yet, they still treat you like you're less." Aaliyah sighed, tapping her fingers on the ceramic cup. "It's not just me, Marcus. It's all of us. Every black face in that building has a story like mine. We're good enough to work, but not enough to belong." Her voice cracked just slightly, the vulnerability hiding behind years of polished smiles. Then, there was Daniel Carter, a colleague who often shadowed her work with an envious eye. Daniel, a white man in his late 20s, wore entitlement like a second skin. He had a charm that disarmed many, but Aaliyah had learned to read the insincerity behind it. "I don't know how she keeps getting ahead," he muttered once under his breath, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "I should have been the lead." Moments like that left Aaliyah drained but sharper. She understood that beneath the polite veneer of professionalism lurked resentment that thrived on racial bias. Outside the office, life wasn't much easier. On the streets, she felt eyes on her when she walked past upscale cafes or boutique stores, the unspoken "you don't belong here" following her like a shadow. At night, when she returned to her small apartment, the quiet hum of the city reminded her of the systemic walls stacked against her. Not just one cruel person, but a society built on centuries of judgment. Yet Aaliyah had allies. Marcus, of course, but also her younger cousin Naomi, just 19, who carried the same fierce determination. Naomi was the spark of rebellion in her family, always questioning, always challenging, never letting injustice go unanswered. When Aaliyah shared stories of her day, Naomi would glare at the ceiling as if it were the building itself at fault. "Why should they get away with this?" she'd demand. "Why can't we just fight back?" And fight back they would. But first, they needed a plan. First, they needed to understand the battlefield. Every slight, every smirk, every whispered comment had been a signal, a roadmap showing where they could strike with purpose. One afternoon, Aaliyah and Marcus attended a high-profile networking event at a luxury hotel downtown, a place where the elite met and judged, where status was currency, and skin color often defined value more than talent. The lobby gleamed with marble floors, gold accents, and chandeliers dripping like liquid light. But as Aaliyah entered, she felt the shift immediately. Conversations faltered mid-laugh, chairs subtly pulled away, eyes lingering with suspicion. She wasn't invisible, but she wasn't welcome either. A group of wealthy, white, impeccably dressed investors took notice of her. One of them, a man in a sharp suit with a laugh that tried too hard to charm, leaned toward his colleague. "Do we really have to engage with her?" he whispered, eyes narrowing. "She's not like us." The comment, meant to be private, reached her ears anyway, slicing through her like glass. Marcus placed a hand lightly on her back. "Ignore them," he whispered, but she could see the fire igniting in his gaze, too. Aaliyah's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from a realization. These were the same walls she'd been fighting against for years. And tonight, something told her, those walls would fall. Later, in the dim light of her apartment, Aaliyah reflected on moments like these, the silent dismissals, the judgmental glances, the overt mockery she had endured. She thought about the countless times she had been told she was too assertive, too emotional, too different. The emotional toll was immense, yet it had forged her resilience. Marcus sat across from her, notebook open, scribbling ideas they could use to make a statement that couldn't be ignored. "This isn't just about proving them wrong," Aaliyah said, quietly. "It's about showing everyone watching that we belong, that we are seen, that our voices matter." Marcus nodded, the determination mirrored in his eyes. "And they will hear us, loud and clear." In that quiet room, plans began to take shape. Small at first, subtle, like embers glowing in the dark. But beneath the calm surface, a storm was forming. A storm fueled by injustice, by humiliation, by years of watching society underestimate them. A storm that would force the world to look directly at the prejudice hiding in plain sight. Aaliyah thought of the girl who had asked him that fateful question, "Will you pretend to love me tonight?" And the man who had answered with real, unwavering love. That moment wasn't just personal. It was symbolic. A refusal to play by society's rules, a declaration that authenticity and truth would always outshine pretense. And so, in the midst of subtle mockery, hidden biases, and silent rejections, the stage was set. Allies and adversaries were all present, whether they realized it or not. The journey from humiliation to empowerment had begun. And as the city lights flickered outside her window, Aaliyah knew nothing would ever be the same again. The city at night had a different rhythm, slower, heavier, yet electric with possibility. Streetlights painted the sidewalks gold, and the distant honk of taxis blended with the murmurs of late-night conversations. Inside a small, dimly lit apartment, Aaliyah, Marcus, and Naomi gathered around a scratched wooden table. Notebooks lay open, pens poised, laptops casting a faint glow over determined faces. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that prickled the skin and made the heart race. "This isn't just a statement," Naomi said, her voice low but intense. "This has to be undeniable. They can't ignore it. If we do this right, it changes everything. Marcus leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. We have to be smart. If we're reckless, it could backfire. They'll try to discredit us, smear us, make it about us instead of the injustice. Aaliyah stared at the ceiling. Her mind spinning with possibilities. Every day brought new reminders of the systemic walls they faced. But tonight they had a plan, small steps that could ignite a firestorm. We start by documenting everything, she said. Every comment, every slight, every microaggression. Proof doesn't lie. And we'll gather allies quietly, people who are tired of watching this play out without consequence. Naomi nodded, eyes bright. I've already started. A few friends from school, some colleagues, they're willing to help. Everyone's scared, but when they see someone leading, someone willing to risk everything, they'll follow. Marcus tapped his pen on the table, a slow, rhythmic beat. We need a trigger event. Something public, something undeniable, something that forces them to face the truth. Aaliyah's gaze hardened. The hotel event last month? That was perfect. They humiliated me in front of investors, treated me like I was invisible. That moment, we can use it. Turn it into a spotlight on them, not me. The three of them began mapping out the logistics. Who would be contacted first? Who could spread the word without risking exposure? How evidence could be compiled and presented in a way that left no room for dismissal. They worked silently for hours, sometimes exchanging whispers so low that Marcus had to lean close to catch every word. Fear was indeed present. Still, it was overshadowed by a collective determination that made the room almost glow with energy. One point, Naomi paused, her hands hovering over her notebook. What if they retaliate? She asked, the vulnerability in her voice barely masked. What if this backfires? Aaliyah reached across the table, gripping her cousin's hand. Then we face it. Fear is what they want us to feel, Naomi. But courage? Courage is contagious, and we have enough to go around. Marcus, always the strategist, chimed in. We'll practice. We'll anticipate every reaction. We can't control everything, but we can control how prepared we are. And when the time comes, hesitation isn't an option. For days, they worked in secrecy, meeting in quiet cafes, whispering on phone calls, sending encrypted messages. Each small act felt like a rebellion. Every documented incident of bias, every recording of whispered ridicule, every photograph of silent exclusion added fuel to the fire. One night, Aaliyah found herself staring at the city skyline from her apartment balcony. The lights twinkled like stars, but beneath that beauty lurked the harsh reality she'd been fighting against her whole life. They think they can humiliate me, silence me, erase me, she whispered into the cool night air. They don't know who I am. Her phone buzzed, a message from Marcus. Ready for the final step? She typed back without hesitation. Let's do this. The plan was risky. The final move would be bold, public, and impossible to ignore. They would expose the elite's bias, the casual cruelty, the systemic prejudice, and they would do it in a way that forced acknowledgement. The hotel lobby incident, the whispered mockery of Daniel Carter, the subtle rejections, they would all be unveiled in a dramatic, undeniable revelation. Rehearsals took place late at night in Aaliyah's apartment. Marcus practiced speaking confidently, addressing a crowd that existed only in their imaginations. Naomi ran simulations of who might resist, who might attempt to discredit them, and how they could pivot. Aaliyah stood before the mirror, her voice firm, her body poised, repeating lines that needed to resonate with authority, truth, and undeniable strength. It has to feel personal, she said one evening. Not just for us, for everyone who's been ignored, silenced, humiliated. Every word, every pause, it needs to strike them in a way they can't ignore. Marcus smiled grimly. It's going to be intense. But that's the point. Intensity commands attention, and when people can't look away, truth becomes impossible to deny. Days turned into nights, and nights into early mornings. Exhaustion crept in, but determination never wavered. Every moment, every whispered plan, every nervous glance at the clock was building toward a crescendo. And all the while, Daniel Carter continued his petty games, oblivious that the tables were turning. Finally, the night arrived. The venue, another upscale hotel gathering, was packed with influential figures, investors, and those who thought their privilege could shield them from accountability. Aaliyah, Marcus, and Naomi moved through the crowd with practiced ease, subtle nods to allies hidden in plain sight. Cameras were strategically placed, recordings running quietly in the background, messages ready to be unleashed at a single command. Marcus leaned close to Aaliyah, whispering, "This is it. Once we start, there's no turning back." Aaliyah nodded, her heart pounding but her resolve unwavering. No turning back, no fear, only truth. They approached the center of the room, faces composed but eyes burning with intent. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was synchronized with the anticipation of the revelation. And then, at the exact right moment, Aaliyah spoke. Not loudly, but with clarity that cut through the murmurs, the small talk, the polite laughter. "I want to share a story," she began, her gaze sweeping over the room like a lighthouse cutting through fog. A story about what it feels like to be ignored, underestimated, and humiliated simply because of who you are, and how it's time for that to end. The room went silent, a collective intake of breath that made her pulse race. Eyes widened, whispers died, and the weight of expectation pressed down. This was the moment they had trained for, the moment that would either ignite change or expose them to ridicule. As she continued, evidence began to surface, subtle, undeniable, and impossible to dismiss. Whispers from Daniel Carter, recordings of his petty complaints, photographs of exclusion, and the detailed documentation of every slight over the years, all presented with precision and undeniable clarity. Gasps filled the room. A few people tried to intervene, but the tide had shifted. Marcus stepped forward, adding context and explaining the broader implications. Naomi, with her fierce, piercing gaze, called out the systemic injustice with unwavering clarity. Every word, every pause, every carefully orchestrated reveal built toward a crescendo of shock, disbelief, and undeniable truth. By the end, the atmosphere was electric. The elite, who once laughed and whispered, were exposed, vulnerable, and forced to confront their own biases. Aaliyah's voice, once quiet in the hallways and lobbies, now rang out with authority, resonance, and courage. And somewhere, in that room full of judgment and silence, a shift had begun. The storm they had built in whispered meetings, late night, planning sessions, and secret strategies had arrived. The rising action, the tension, the fear, the anticipation had set the stage for a confrontation that no one in that room would ever forget. The grand ballroom was breathtaking, all crystal chandeliers and polished marble floors, a space designed to impress and intimidate. Hundreds of influential figures milled about, sipping champagne, exchanging shallow smiles, and speaking in tones that masked judgment with courtesy. To most, it was just another networking event. But for Aaliyah, Marcus, and Naomi, it was the stage for truth, a stage long denied to them, now theirs to command. Aaliyah's heart pounded like a drum in her chest as she stepped to the center of the room. The lights glinted off the chandeliers, casting fleeting shadows across the faces of the very people who had spent years questioning her worth. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. This was no longer about fear. This was about justice. "I want everyone here to listen," she began, her voice slicing through the murmur of the crowd, low and controlled but unwavering. I want to share what it's like to be ignored, dismissed, and humiliated simply because of the color of your skin. Not once, not twice, but countless times by people who thought they could erase our presence, our contributions, our dignity. Hush fell. Some faces flushed, others stiffened, but no one spoke. She paused, letting the silence grow heavy, letting the weight of her words settle. Marcus stepped beside her, holding a tablet that displayed photos, recordings, and messages. A visual testament to the microaggressions and outright prejudices they had endured. Naomi moved among the guests subtly, passing evidence to allies. In real time, their shock palpable. Aaliyah clicked the tablet. Images flashed across a large screen at the far end of the room. Investor meetings where she had been ignored, Daniel Carter whispering petty complaints under his breath, emails that dismissed her work without justification. Gasps echoed. Whispers halted mid-sentence. "You see them," she said, voice firm. "These are not isolated incidents. These are systematic patterns. These are the walls we've been climbing, fighting against, every single day." Daniel Carter's face turned red. He took a step forward, his mouth opening to argue, to defend himself, to dismiss. But Aaliyah's gaze met his, unwavering. "You," she said slowly, pointing directly at him, "believed that your status, your entitlement, your privilege could silence me. You thought no one would notice your mockery, your exclusion, your subtle sabotage. But we noticed. And now, so will everyone." The room fell into stunned silence. Some looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Others whispered frantically to each. Other, realization dawning like a cold wave. Then came the twist. One of Daniel's allies, a high-ranking investor known for his influence and connections, stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I had no idea," he said, voice shaking. "I supported him without knowing." His admission spread like wildfire. Eyes turned toward Daniel, confusion and betrayal written across faces that had once been allies. Aaliyah felt a surge of vindication, but she kept her voice steady, measured. "This isn't just about one person," she said. "It's about a system that allows bias to thrive, that rewards silence and punishes honesty. And tonight, we refuse to be silenced." Marcus added, "We are not asking for sympathy. We are demanding accountability. Look at the evidence. Understand the patterns. And then ask yourself, what part did you play, knowingly or unknowingly, in letting this continue?" The tension in the room became palpable. Champagne flutes trembled in hesitant hands. Conversations halted mid-word. Cameras captured every reaction, every flicker of discomfort, every ripple of awareness. The elite, who had once looked down on Aaliyah and Naomi, were now forced to confront their own complicity in the prejudice that had been so casually ignored. And then came the cinematic twist. A video recording they had secretly obtained from one of Daniel Carter's private meetings. Played. There he was, in his own words, mocking Aaliyah, dismissing her ideas, and ridiculing her in front of senior investors. The video was undeniable. Laughter, whispers, mockery, all exposed. The room gasped collectively. Daniel tried to speak, but his voice faltered under the weight of truth. Allies who had stood by him now looked at him with suspicion and disbelief. One by one, they turned away, leaving him exposed, alone in his arrogance. Naomi stepped forward, voice ringing with defiance. "This is the reality. This is the truth of what people like Daniel think they can get away with. But no more. Not tonight. Not ever again." Aaliyah's own voice rose, confident, commanding. "We are not invisible. We are not less than. And the world will see us, our talent, our resilience, our worth. And anyone who doubted us, mocked us, or humiliated us You will face the consequences of your actions. By the end of the night, the impact was undeniable. Daniel Carter, once smug and confident, was now the subject of whispers and judgment. His attempts to maintain control crumbled as the elite witnessed firsthand the power of truth and the courage it inspires. Aaliyah, Marcus, and Naomi had flipped the script, turning humiliation into empowerment, invisibility into undeniable presence. As the guests dispersed, some avoiding eye contact, others approaching cautiously with apologies and questions, Aaliyah felt a rush of emotion, relief, triumph, and a deep, unshakable pride. They had faced fear head-on, planned meticulously, and executed with precision. The culmination of weeks of strategy, long nights, and quiet determination had reached its apex, and in that moment, she realized something profound. Justice was not always about revenge, but about exposure, awareness, and accountability. The world had seen the truth, and it could no longer pretend it didn't exist. The aftermath was almost surreal. The ballroom, once buzzing with chatter and clinking glasses, now felt empty, hollowed by truth. Aaliyah, Marcus, and Naomi lingered for a moment, letting the weight of the evening settle. Every whisper of shock, every sidelong glance, every awkward silence was a testament to the storm they had unleashed and survived. Daniel Carter's downfall was swift. Within days, news of the incident spread through professional circles. His reputation, carefully constructed, over the years, crumbled under the undeniable evidence of his bias and cruelty. Meetings he had once dominated now passed him by. Investors hesitated to work with him. Those who had laughed at him or followed unthinkingly began distancing themselves, some even issuing quiet apologies. The illusion of invincibility he had carried like armor was gone. For Aaliyah, the impact was both external and internal. Her career, long hindered by subtle prejudice, now carried a new momentum. Offers of collaboration, recognition, and leadership began to flow. Doors that had remained closed for years suddenly opened. But more importantly, she felt a shift within herself. The fear and doubt that had accompanied every hallway conversation and meeting glance no longer held sway. She had transformed humiliation into empowerment, mockery into a message, invisibility into undeniable presence. Marcus, too, felt the weight lift. His constant vigilance, careful planning, and unwavering support had made him a silent architect of change. He realized that standing beside Aaliyah and Naomi, embracing the risk, had been both terrifying and exhilarating. There was pride in knowing that courage, meticulous strategy, and truth had created a ripple effect, one that couldn't be ignored or silenced. Naomi, younger but fiercely determined, recognized her own growth as well. Watching the plan unfold successfully, seeing allies rally, witnessing accountability finally take root, had shown her the power of action, the value of persistence, and the necessity of refusing to stay silent. She had learned firsthand that courage wasn't about recklessness, it was about calculated intentional resistance against injustice. Outside of their immediate circle, the broader community began to notice. Colleagues who had silently endured the same treatment reached out, inspired to speak up. Social media buzzed with discussion, the story shared widely, resonating with countless others who had faced similar injustices. For every person who had doubted that their voice mattered, there was a reminder that standing up, together, strategically, and boldly, could yield change. Aaliyah, standing once again on her apartment balcony, watched the city lights flicker below. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that the storm they had created had made the world pause, reflect, and reckon with uncomfortable truths. But beyond that, she felt a sense of purpose, a renewed commitment to use her experiences to uplift others, to ensure that systemic bias could no longer operate unchecked, and to remind herself and everyone watching that resilience could manifest as action, not just endurance. In private moments, they laughed softly, shared quiet conversations about strategy, mistakes, victories, and growth. The tension that had gripped them for weeks slowly ebbed, replaced by a sense of accomplishment that was hard-earned and deeply deserved. And while they knew the fight against systemic injustice was far from over, this victory marked a turning point. It was a statement that courage, truth, and persistence could break through even the most calculated cruelty. And as they looked at each other, Aaliyah, Marcus, Naomi, they understood the true significance. They had not just confronted one man, one incident, or one injustice. They had challenged a culture, disrupted silence, and shown that the cost of bias and mockery would no longer be borne silently. The ripple effect had begun, and they were the catalysts. The story doesn't end with applause or fleeting recognition. It ends with a lesson that reverberates far beyond one ballroom, one incident, or one person's courage. Aaliyah, Marcus, and Naomi showed that injustice, no matter how subtle or systemic, cannot thrive in silence. When courage meets strategy, when voices rise together, the walls of prejudice begin to crumble. Every insult, every whispered mockery, every slight meant to belittle them became fuel, not for bitterness, but for transformation. They proved that standing up for yourself and for others is not just an act of defiance, it's an act of truth. It's a reminder that no one should ever have to pretend to be invisible to fit into someone else's world. And yet, this is not just their story. What if this happened in your school, your workplace, or your community? What if someone you knew faced humiliation, exclusion, or prejudice day after day silently? At the same time, the world looked the other way. What would you do? Would you speak up, take a stand, or walk past, pretending it didn't exist? The power of action is undeniable. Even when the odds seem insurmountable, even when fear threatens to paralyze, even when those in power believe they are untouchable, truth and courage have a force that cannot be ignored. It may start with one person, one act, or one voice, but when it spreads, it becomes unstoppable. Aaliyah's journey reminds us that love, for yourself, for others, and for justice, can never be feigned. Pretending may protect you temporarily, but choosing real courage changes everything. It dismantles walls, exposes lies, and reshapes the world in ways that fear and apathy never can. So the next time you witness injustice, remember this. Silence is complicity. Courage is contagious, and the smallest act of truth can ignite the fiercest change. Stand up, speak out, and never settle for pretending. Because the world doesn't need more pretense. It requires real love, real justice, and authentic voices willing to be heard. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.